Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the long-range and all-encompassing impact of the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan. Like so many Americans, I was stunned by the thoughtless way in which the United States conducted their withdrawal from Afghanistan. The most difficult part for me is the ripple effect. That single act of moving a few thousand U.S. forces out of a faraway country will significantly impact the safety and security of the world for years to come. Most significantly, that single act will eradicate all human intel in unfriendly places. Here's why. Standard operating procedure of the CIA handler or an intel handler from any of the other U.S. intel agencies is to handle a few dozen assets each one. These assets regularly deliver information, aka intel. Most of the information is irrelevant, but it is live and on the ground. The information is not culled from analysts sitting 10,000 miles away, reading newspapers or watching local news. It's culled right there and in real time. After watching the United States abandon their assets and their translators, after the inevitable occurs and those people are beheaded by the Taliban, and beheadings are broadcast around the world, there will never be enough incentive or enough money to convince a local person living in an unfriendly country to help the United States. Russia and China, almost the entire Middle East, swaths of South America, Africa, all over. These are all places where the United States always depends on local intel. The US can depend on them no more. They will all shut their doors, their mouths, and their pockets when the U.S. comes calling. Stories of harassment of those locals who aided America have emerged from Afghanistan, door-to-door searches. There are interrogations, and most of them are pretty simple and formulaic. In one case, for example, Afghani interrogators kept asking a U.S. translator to speak English. He kept insisting that he did not. Finally, he broke down and gave in and spoke in English. With a swift flash of the sword, he was decapitated. Also significant, very significant, is the military equipment. Over $80 billion of equipment was abandoned in Afghanistan. 80 billion. Yes, abandoned. There's no other word to use. People were abandoned. Equipment was abandoned. The White House can dispute the word, but abandonment is exactly what happened, exactly what they chose to do. The vast amount of weaponry will not remain with the Taliban in Afghanistan. For a price, they have more than enough military might to suit their own needs and to supply any of their terrorist compatriots who want or need the best U.S. military equipment money can buy. It is a treasure trove, in the classical sense of the term treasure trove, and the treasures will be dispersed in several directions. The Taliban will take what it wants. That's direction number one. They will then sell it to other terror groups and countries who want various weapons. Those are enemies of the United States. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is the U.S. weaponry will go straight into the hands and labs of the Chinese and the Russians. The equipment will be reverse engineered, and then China and Russia will take what they learn and use it to improve their own weaponry and to militarily take down the United States. This is a close and approximate list of what the Taliban now have. Consider the total number of weapons and hardware. Then consider that the estimated core strength of the Taliban is only about 75,000 units. That means fighters. It will take your breath away. The United States abandoned the following: 22,174 Humvees, 637 M37 vehicles, 155 pro-mine vehicles, 169 armored personnel carriers, 8,000 trucks, 42,000 pickups and SUVs, 64,000 machine guns, 162,000 radios, 16,000 night vision glasses, 358,000 assault rifles, 126,000 pistols, 176 artillery pieces, 33 M17 helicopters, 33 Black Hawk helicopters, 43 M530 helicopters, 4 C-130 transport planes, 23 Embraers, Super Tucana planes, 28 Cessna 208s and 10 Cessna A208s, Strike Air Force craft. Abandoned and left for the enemy to pick up and distribute 16,035 night vision glasses. What will happen if they get into the hands of Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda. In 1915, the British, Australians, and New Zealanders battled against the Turks and Germans at Gallipoli. It was a battle, and bloody it was. It was trench warfare at its worst. Nearly 500,000 people were killed or wounded. After 11 months of battle, the British pulled all their forces out of the battle. This is what German General Victor Karl von Sanders reported in his autobiography entitled 5 Years in Turkey. The booty at the South Group was extraordinary. Wagons, parks, automobile parts, mountains of ammunition, arms, and entrenching tools were collected. Most of the tents, camps, and barracks had been left standing in part with all their equipment. Many hundreds of horses lay in rows, shot or poisoned. But quite a number of horses and mules were captured and turned over to the British artillery. The immense booty of war material was used for Turkish armies. Many shiploads of conserved flour and wood were removed to Constantinople. What the ragged and insufficiently nourished Turkish soldiers took away cannot be estimated. That was then, and it was horrific. This is much, much worse. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from Ynet News, written by Sever Ploker. Ploker is a very critical thinker, always exploring issues in hope of furthering the conversation about important ideas and events and concerns involving Israel and the Jewish world. As my father used to say about people like Sever Ploker, he has a fine mind. This column was published on August 31st, 2021, and is entitled, How Israel Went from Being Model on COVID to Cautionary Tale, subtitled Opinion. Despite the euphoria surrounding the booster campaign and the country's high vaccination rates, the public deserves to know how and why Israel turned into one of the worst affected countries by coronavirus in mere months. This actually is a question that I've been asked by dozens of people, dozens of times. So I'm glad the Ploker addresses it, even though we have slightly different points of view on the reasons for the situation. Let's begin. Ploker writes, the worrying surge of COVID spread in the country may have somewhat stabilized, but as important as it may be, it certainly doesn't herald the end of the pandemic. The country's number of severe patients has surpassed the 700 mark, while the contagion rate among the country's education professionals has spiked to 9%, with less than a day to go until the start of the school year. The number of virus-related fatalities has also stabilized at around 22 per day. For comparison, the number of fatalities in Mount Meron stampede, Israel's deadliest civil disaster, was 45. Assuming the pandemic in Israel does indeed subside, thanks to the combination of the booster campaign, the mask mandate, the reduction of international flights, and a lot of luck in the first week of the new school year, some questions still remain. Now, I would say to that point, and it's important, as Sever Ploker does not actually speak to anything other than the numbers. And so numbers have already come down since he wrote the piece. But the question and the points he raises are important despite that. The numbers have dropped to about 11 deaths per day and 580 severely ill patients as of my writing and this analysis. Ploker's piece, back to the op-ed, reads, how did Israel become one of the worst affected countries by coronavirus in the world in mere months? Why did we need an urgent approval of the third vaccine shot despite having one of the highest vaccination rates in the world? Now Ploker talks about the third shot, the booster shot, and the country's morale. He concludes by writing, in order for the booster to effectively halt the spread of the contagion in the next 2 or 3 weeks, the majority of the 5.6 million Israelis who have received the first 2 doses will have to get the booster. We are still a long way away from that goal. Up until now, only 2 million Israelis received the third jab. Not 3 million, as the Prime Minister Naftali Bennett mistakenly told U.S. President Joe Biden at their meeting in Washington. The rest are still on the fence. The public is entitled to an honest, professional answer to the troubling question of why we have deteriorated the way we have. Not in an effort to look for culprits, but to learn the needed lesson and prepare for the future to come, so that we do not fall so far from grace again. If you noticed, Plocher raises questions, but he really does not give answers. The answer is, and these are some of the answers, that people thought the vaccine was perfect, and they started traveling again and gathering again and contaminating again. Israelis brought the virus back with them from elsewhere in the world and spread it around. The vaccine is not perfect, but being vaccinated is the best way to protect ourselves and save our lives. Next up is a column from Jewish Insider. It was published on September 3rd, 2021, and was written by Matthew Kassel. The column is entitled, Axel Springer Doubles Down on Pro-Israel Support in Lead-Up to Politico Acquisition. CEO Matthias Dopfner described support for Israel as very meaningful in recent company-wide call. The author begins by bringing everyone up to speed on what, not who, but what Axel Springer is. The essential point is that Axel Springer is a huge international media conglomerate, a huge company based in Germany, and is very pro-Israel. The news is that the company is buying Politico, a Washington-based media company, for $1 billion. This is how Kassel begins. As the German publishing giant Axel Springer prepares to acquire Politico in a high-profile transaction valued at more than $1 billion, questions have arisen concerning the degree to which the scoop-driven Beltway news site will adapt to a long-standing set of corporate values held by the European media conglomerate, including staunch support for Israel. Axel Springer is guided by a list of core principles known internally as the essentials that promote a united Europe and the transatlantic alliance, while supporting the Jewish people and the right of existence of the State of Israel, among other things. The right to exist sounds so simple, but not in the media world, so it raises some eyebrows. The column continues. The mission statement was largely enshrined more than 50 years ago by the company's eponymous founder, an outspoken anti-communist and pro-Israel advocate who died in 1985. But Axel Springer remains fiercely committed to its 5 essential values, which editorial employees at the German language publications like Bild and Die Welt are contractually committed to uphold. Whether Politico staffers will face a similar mandate has been a source of ongoing speculation since the deal was announced late last week. Launched in 2007 by an enterprising pair of former Washington Post reporters, Politico inscribed no such lofty principles in its founding mission statement, claiming simply that its job was to win an audience, with reporting that presents the news fairly, not through an ideological prism. In a recent interview, Robert Albatron, who currently owns Politico, seemed to have cleared up things. The publishing mogul revealed to the New York Times media columnist Ben Smith that employees will not be required to sign Axel Springer's mission statement when the sale goes through at what is expected to be the end of the year. Now Kassel addresses the central question about support of Israel. He describes how the Israeli flag flew at the German headquarters during the conflict with Hamas in Gaza, those 11 days, and the reaction it received. This is how Kassel describes the reaction. In mid-June, Axel Springer, which owns a number of websites in Israel, found itself fielding criticism from some workers who took issue with the company's decision to fly the Israeli flag outside its Berlin headquarters during the conflict with Hamas. But Matthias Dopfner, the company's CEO, who has described support of Israel as a German duty, stood firm. I think I'm being very frank with you, he told Axel Springer's approximately 6,000 employees in a company-wide conference call. A person who has an issue with an Israeli flag being raised for 1 week here after anti-Semitic demonstrations should look for a new job. Kassel describes how CEO Dopfner, in conversation with 16,500 employees, brought in the head of one of the company's Israeli acquisitions. This is what he writes. The 58-year-old Axel Springer chief then invited a fellow colleague at Yad 2, or Yad 2, the Israeli classified portal, to join him on screen for a conversation about how the company's stance on Israel has resonated for her personally. First of all, it makes me very happy and content to get such great support from a large organization, an influential organization, said the employee. a vice president of marketing at Yad 2. But most of all, it's important for me to get that support from my colleagues. Dapner anticipated possible criticism of the company's cherished value, put forth a rejoinder. Nevertheless, he countered, a lot of people are asking the question, well, isn't that second essential a kind of bias because we support explicitly the right of existence of Israel? How about Palestine? And isn't that kind of one-sided? I'm not a political person, she replied. You know, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very complicated. Nearing the end of the exchange, Dapner transitioned to a personal note of his own. On the other hand, there is not only the Israeli perspective, there is also the German perspective, he said. I have to say that for me, it's quite a terrible experience to talk to more and more friends here in Germany, Jewish friends, who are seriously discussing whether they should leave Germany because they feel unsafe on the streets. If you wear a kippah, if you speak Hebrew, if you identify as a Jew, it gets more and more unsafe. That this happens in Germany, the country that organized the Holocaust and killed 6 million Jews, it's inconceivable for me, Dapner lamented. I feel a real shame, and also for that reason, I think it's important that we are making a clear point here. Dapner encouraged viewers to participate in advancing Axel Springer's Essentials by sending questions to the executive board. The project, which remains somewhat nebulous at the moment, will likely be rolled out in a more comprehensive manner after the political deal is finalized. We think this is truly something that should be important for everyone, Dapner emphasized in his presentation. So we want to start this process of discussion. It's refreshing, by the way, that there is at least a dialogue going on, not just in Axel Springer, but in general amongst the employees and the executives. Dialogue about these issues somewhere else in the media other than here on JBS TV and on my show also. This is an excellent piece. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you several items today, not just cartoons, memes also, of course, and headlines. First up is a headline announcing that the new head chaplain at Harvard is an atheist. This is true, not made up or farcical. He's a rabbi, he's an ethical humanist. All that is fine, but as chaplain, certainly as head chaplain at the university, he will need to minister to the religious masses who use the chaplain's office. He will need to relate to them and their issues, many of which involve their relationship with God. That is where it's going to get very tricky for an ethical humanist. Next up is a different kind of headline, a very funny headline. It's also true. Facebook apologizes after labeling part of the Declaration of Independence hate speech. The headline is funny, but the situation is sad. It is truly a very sad stage in the world in which we live, when the foundations of our society are determined to be offensive, when only a few stand up and defend our Constitution, or the Declaration of Independence. Star Trek is indeed a cult, and it is everywhere. For those who are not fans, a warning: never misspeak and refer to Star Trek as Star Wars. That is a sin of the highest order. This meme asks an interesting question. Does anyone else find it weird that when Star Trek boldly goes where no one has gone before, they always find someone there? That is funny. This next meme pokes fun at the Food Network, and in a way that's sort of transformed the way in which many people approach food. The Food Network has changed all of us, especially how foodies approach food. The meme reads, "Watches the Food Network once. I made a pureed nut spread with a grape relish reduction paired with a brioche bun." And of course, there's a picture of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. In order to increase the vaccination rate among teenagers, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett hosted a live broadcast on TikTok, the video sharing app, where he answered viewers' questions regarding vaccines and the risk of COVID. He said, "The coronavirus is an epidemic that will end someday. Will we have to get vaccinated every 6 months? Maybe yes, maybe no," said Bennett. I believe that within 2 months, approval will be given to vaccinate children aged 6 to 12. We see that the vaccines work. It could be that the third jab will last forever. It could last for no more than a half a year. And that's not the end of the world. What matters is that the vaccine is not a poison. The poison is the pathogen. Hopefully, this venture into the teenage social media will work, and they'll get vaccinated. In an unusual diplomatic moment, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid criticized the way the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, which led to the consequent takeover of the country by the Taliban terrorist organization. It is unusual for the Israeli Foreign Minister to comment on U.S. policy. Lapid said, "The withdrawal was botched. I think the whole world is worried. America first and foremost." Lapid continued, "This was probably the right decision, but the way it was done was wrong. I do not think we fully understand the implications of this move. This is going to have a big impact on Al-Qaeda and on ISIS." Private organizations, private people, are still chartering planes to help U.S. citizens and Afghanis who were helpful to the United States. They're helping them escape Afghanistan. They're facing terrible obstacles. At least 4 chartered planes, and I heard just recently 6, capable of rescuing several hundred people each, are sitting on the tarmac in Afghanistan. They've been unable to board people they came to rescue. They've been unable to leave the country for days. There are a variety of reasons for why they cannot take off. One reason, they say, is that the State Department will not allow them. Another is an Afghan official at the airport, which is in the northern city of Mazar al-Sharif, said that the would-be passengers were Afghans. Many of them did not have passports or visas, and thus were unable to leave the country by the Taliban's conditions. He said that had they left the airport while the situation was being sorted out, they would have been able to get out. Entrance and exit to Afghanistan has now been tightened. None of this portends well for those desperate to leave the now Taliban-led country. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom have all been urging Iran to come back to the table and once again talk to the P5+1 about nuclear plans. In response, the president, Ibrahim Raisi, announced that Iran would indeed resume talks with world powers with the objective of reviving the 215 nuke deal. But, there's a big but, without Western pressure. Raisi also made it clear that Iran's objective is lifting U.S. sanctions, imposed sanctions. Negotiations without pressure, I don't think that exists anywhere in the world. The entire point of negotiations is to put pressure and push back against pressure. Maybe quite possibly, this is Iran's first push. France and Germany have been pushing Iran to return to negotiations. A break in the talks was called a few months ago to allow Iran to have elections in June. Now elections are over, and France is demanding an immediate restart amid Western concerns that Tehran is expanding its atomic network. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, aka the UN nuclear watchdog, confirmed that. For the first time, Iran has produced uranium metal enriched up to 20% fissile purity, lifted their production capacity of uranium enriched to now 60%. And that's an impetus for a big push by France, Germany, and Britain to get Iran back to the table and talking. There was an attack on the oil fields of Saudi Arabia recently. A missile was shot and intercepted over Saudi Arabia's oil-rich eastern region. The Saudi Ministry of Defense reported the news of the attack. The missile was intercepted over the suburban city of Dammam. The falling shrapnel from the missile fell and injured 2 Saudi children and caused light damage to 14 houses. This news came in a statement carried by the Saudi state news agency, SPA. Photos on the state media showed broken glass, damaged entrances, several residential buildings were destroyed. The conventional wisdom blames the attack on the Iranian-aligned Houthi forces. There has been no immediate claim of responsibility in the Houthi-run media. The coalition of Western powers policing the region reported also that they intercepted and destroyed ballistic missiles heading towards Jazan and Nijran in the southern part of the country. They earlier reported the interception of 3 other explosive-laden drones headed towards the Saudi kingdom. Iran-sponsored tensions are increasing all over. It's just a matter of time before one of these missiles or drones gets through. As I mentioned earlier, it seems that the fourth wave of COVID in Israel is beginning to subside. Positivity rates have been dropping, the numbers of hospitalizations are dropping, the deaths are dropping, but that said, there are still people dying. COVID is still there and still dangerous, even for those Israelis who are triple vaccinated. Here are some numbers from Sunday, September 5th. After 11 more Israelis succumbed to the virus, the total death toll since the start of the pandemic is 7,205. Of the 127 who died from COVID since the beginning of September, 65 were unvaccinated, 42 received the first 2 doses, but the booster shot, only 15 got all 3 vaccinations, were seriously ill. 39,600 received the 3rd dose just on Sunday alone. 2,600,000 Israelis were given the shot since the rollout in July. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the peanut butter and jelly sandwich has a long history? And like so much else, peanut butter and jelly even has a not very well known but important Jewish component too. Peanut butter was probably first invented in the late 1800s. It was originally paired with savory foods such as pimento, cheese, celery, watercress, saltines, and toasted crackers. In a Good Housekeeping article published in 1896, in May of 1896, a recipe urged homemakers to use a meat grinder to make peanut butter and spread the result on bread. The next month, a culinary magazine called Table Talk published a peanut butter sandwich recipe. And then, in 1901, a recipe for peanut butter and jelly was published in the Boston Cooking School magazine. This recipe called for 3 very thin layers of bread and 2 of filling. 1 of peanut paste, whatever brand you prefer, I suppose, and the current crabapple jelly for the other, and called it, as so far as I know, original. Now, in the early 1900s, as the price of peanut butter dropped, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches were enjoyed by both the rich and the poor. With the invention of sliced bread, which didn't happen until the 1920s, PB&J sandwiches became popular with children who could now make the sandwiches on their own. Since World War II, both peanut butter and jelly have been found on U.S. soldiers' military ration lists. National Peanut Butter and Jelly Day occurs annually in the United States on April 2nd. Finally, the Jewish component. Peanuts are indigenous to America, the United States and South America. So the rabbis and the Talmud had no idea of what they were. There is no word in Hebrew for peanuts, so the generic word for nut is used, botnim, for peanuts. For peanut butter, they just add the word butter and chemah and call it chemat botnim, peanut butter. But peanuts are not nuts. Nuts grow on trees, and the blessing over nuts on trees is borei pri ha'etz, which means the fruit of the tree. Peanuts are a goober. It's in the ground. It grows on the ground. It's a legume. That means it has edible seeds with a pod and a string. And that's why, unlike almonds, pecans, and other nuts, the blessing for peanuts is borei pri ha'adamah, brings forth fruit of the earth. First, modern rabbis had to first understand where peanuts came from. Then they could designate the blessing. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.